Again, please, not again. I threw open the door, and the scene that greeted me was one torn from my recurring nightmares. Marcus, my husband, stood before the grand Victorian fireplace in our living room, a sheaf of my manuscript pages in his hand, casually feeding them, one by one, into the hungry orange flames that already consumed a significant portion of the last bookstore. He wasn't frenzied or angry or even particularly animated. He was calm, appallingly calm, like a man tidying up loose ends, an accountant balancing a ledger, the ledger of my creative soul. Marcus! The name tore from my throat, a strangled, broken sound. I lunged forward, a desperate, clumsy scramble, my knees hitting the Persian rug with a painful thud. My hands, heedless of the searing heat, darted towards the grate, batting at the burning pages, trying to salvage something, anything from the inferno. The edges of the paper bit at my fingertips, tiny, vicious burns. "What are you doing? Stop it! That's my novel!" He turned, his perfectly sculpted face unreadable in the flickering firelight. He held up a hand, not to strike, but to halt me, as one might calm a hysterical child. A small, almost pitying smile touched his lips. "Olivia, darling, do try to be rational. It's for the best. A kindness, really." He then proceeded to drop another page, chapter 5, where Alara meets the enigmatic mapmaker into the heart of the fire. It blackened, curled, and vanished in a puff of gray smoke. "A kindness!" I shrieked, the sound raw and ugly in the opulent room. My eyes stung, not just from the smoke, but from the scalding, unshed tears of utter devastation. "You call burning 3 years of my work, my heart, my life, a kindness?" I snatched a charred, fragile remnant from the edge of the fire. It crumbled to dust in my trembling fingers. The smell, oh God, the smell. It was the funeral pyre of my dreams. He sighed then, a long, drawn-out exhalation of weary patience, the kind he reserved for my emotional outbursts. He took a deliberate sip from the crystal tumbler of amber liquid, probably his finest single malt, that sat on the marble mantelpiece. "Let's be honest, Olivia, no one was ever going to publish this. It's sentimental, trite. You have a certain flair with words, I'll grant you, but you lack discipline, focus. This is garbage." Garbage. The word, delivered with such casual cruelty, struck me harder than a physical blow. This was the third time. The third manuscript he had systematically destroyed. The first, City of Whispers, a collection of interconnected short stories set in a fantastical version of Prague, he'd deemed too niche, too introspective. He'd waited until I was out for the day, then meticulously shredded every page, leaving the confetti of my efforts in a neat pile on my desk. I'd found it and wept until I was hollowed out, a fragile shell of grief. The second, The Alchemist's Daughter, a sprawling historical fantasy. He'd criticized for its lack of commercial appeal and unrealistic female protagonist. That time, he'd made me watch as he fed it, chapter by chapter, into the garden incinerator, the smoke carrying my ambitions away on the wind. I'd screamed then, a torrent of rage and pain until my voice was a ragged whisper. I'd sworn I'd never let him near my work again, and I hadn't, not really. After The Alchemist's Daughter was reduced to ash, I'd taken precautions. Every word I'd written since, every painstaking revision of the last bookstore was saved, duplicated, triplicated. On a tiny, password-protected flash drive, hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of War and Peace on my bookshelf. In the cloud, under an anonymous email address he knew nothing about. He could burn these physical pages, this tangible representation of my labor, but he couldn't truly destroy the story itself. He didn't know. The thought was a small, cold comfort, a tiny ember of defiance glowing in the vast darkness of my despair. But the symbolism of this act, this deliberate, repeated annihilation, it was still a profound violation. It was his way of telling me that my thoughts, my creativity, my very essence, were worthless unless he deemed them otherwise. He set his glass down with a decisive click. "Actually, Olivia, I've done more than just dispose of the dross." He walked towards his leather briefcase, which lay open on the Chesterfield sofa. He pulled out a much slimmer stack of papers, neatly bound with a clip. "I've taken the central premise, the magical bookstore, which I admit has a certain simplistic charm, and I've improved it." A chilling premonition gripped me. Improved it? Marcus, what are you talking about? What have you done? I've made it marketable, darling, he said, his voice smooth, confident. I've tightened the plot, eliminated the superfluous characters. That dreadful talking cat, for instance, had to go and given it a more compelling, dynamic protagonist. A male protagonist, of course. Audiences connect better with a strong male lead in this genre. He tapped the new manuscript. And the ending? Your original ending was ambiguous, weak. I've crafted something much more satisfying, more cinematic. My blood ran cold. You rewrote my book? I salvaged it, he corrected, a self-congratulatory smile playing on his lips. And the good news is my agent loves it. He's already sent it out to a few select producers. People I know, people who trust my judgment. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Arthur Jennings is very keen, and Amelia Hayes at North Star Pictures thinks it could be their next big fantasy franchise. They're talking about a fast-track development with me attached to direct, naturally. The room began to spin. The smoke, the heat, the audacity of his betrayal, it was overwhelming. He hadn't just destroyed my work, he'd stolen its bones, twisted its soul, and was now parading it as his own creation. He was profiting from the very thing he'd just declared garbage. You pitched my story, your version of my story, without even telling me? My voice was dangerously low, trembling with a rage that was rapidly eclipsing the shock. He had the gall to look affronted. Our version, Olivia. And why would I tell you? So you could fill my head with your usual romantic notions and unrealistic expectations. I deal with the realities of the industry. You write your little fantasies. It's a perfectly sensible division of labor. He actually chuckled. You should be thanking me. This is your ticket out of obscurity. You'll even get a story by credit. Generous, don't you think? Generous? I choked back a hysterical laugh. You burn my creation, then expect me to be grateful when you offer me crumbs from the feast you've stolen from my table? The unfairness of it, the sheer breathtaking arrogance, was a physical weight on my chest. This wasn't just about a book anymore. It was about my identity, my worth, everything he had systematically tried to chip away at over the years. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Olivia, he said, waving a dismissive hand. You're always so emotional. This is business, and I'm very good at business. He picked up his drink again, a conqueror surveying his domain. Jennings is expecting a call from me tomorrow to discuss potential screenwriters. It's all happening very quickly. The casual cruelty of his triumph, the way he so effortlessly erased me from my own narrative, was the final straw. A wave of dizziness, hot and sickening, washed over me. The edges of my vision began to blur. I reached out, grasping for the mantelpiece to steady myself, my fingers scrabbling against the cold, unforgiving marble. The ornate carving, a cherub with a smug, knowing smile, seemed to mock me. My knees gave way. The last thing I saw before the world dissolved into blackness was Marcus's indifferent face, illuminated by the dying embers of my burning story. The last thing I heard was the faint, distant clinking of ice in his glass. A persistent, dull ache throbbed at my left temple, a rhythmic counterpoint to the chirping of sparrows outside a window I didn't immediately recognize. I groaned, my eyelids fluttering open to a room bathed in the soft, gray light of an early London morning. My first thought was, hospital. Marcus must have called an ambulance after I collapsed. My head injury. Had I cracked my skull? But this wasn't a sterile hospital room. The wallpaper was a faded, slightly peeling Laura Ashley print of cabbage roses, a pattern I'd once adored. The duvet pulled up to my chin was soft, worn cotton, printed with cheerful yellow daisies. My old duvet. My hand flew to my temple, no bandage, no sticky residue of dried blood. Just smooth skin, tender to the touch, but unbroken. Panic, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, pierced through the fog of my confusion. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my ribs. My gaze darted around the small, cluttered bedroom, the rickety pine bookshelf overflowing with dog-eared paperbacks, the chipped ceramic mug on the nightstand, likely holding the dregs of last night's chamomile tea. The ancient, wheezing laptop perched precariously on a stack of literary journals on the small desk by the window. This wasn't just a room from my past. This was the room. My tiny rented room in a shared flat in Earl's Court. The one I'd lived in 5 years ago, right after university, when I was a wide-eyed editorial assistant at Finch and Sparrow Publishing. Before Marcus. Before the grand house, the loveless marriage, the systematic destruction of my creative spirit. "No," I whispered, my voice hoarse. This can't be. It had to be a dream, a vivid, delusionary side effect of a concussion. Perhaps I was in a coma, my mind conjuring this elaborate, strangely comforting tableau from my past. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet landing on the familiar cool of the painted floorboards, a shiver tracing its way up my spine. The clothes slung over the back of the desk chair, a pair of faded jeans, a slightly misshapen woolen cardigan, were mine. My old clothes. The ones I'd practically lived in during that first year in London. My reflection in the cracked wardrobe mirror was a ghost. Younger, yes, by 5 years. The lines of exhaustion and unhappiness that Marcus had etched around my eyes and mouth were gone. My hair was longer, less styled, the way I used to wear it. There was a hesitant, almost hopeful light in the eyes that stared back, a light I hadn't seen in years. I stumbled toward the desk, my legs unsteady. The laptop. If this was real, the date on the laptop. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. It took an eternity to boot up, its ancient hard drive groaning in protest. Finally, the desktop flickered into view, a cheesy motivational poster of a kitten hanging from a branch, captioned, "Hang in there." A default image I'd never bothered to change. In the bottom right corner of the screen, the date glowed softly, May 17th, and the year, displayed in small, unassuming digits, was 5 years prior to the day my world had gone black by the fireplace. A strangled sob escaped my lips. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It was impossible. Time travel, rebirth. The concepts were so fantastical, so divorced from reality, that my mind struggled to grasp them. Yet the evidence was all around me, irrefutable, tangible. The very air in the room smelled different. A faint mix of dust, old books, and the cheap lavender polish I used to use on the furniture. I needed proof. Undeniable proof that went beyond my own senses, my own fractured memories. My old job at Finch and Sparrow, Sarah, my closest friend there, my confidant in those early, struggling days. Her boyfriend, David. He'd proposed to her around this time. It had been a huge office event, everyone excited, champagne corks popping at lunchtime. I racked my brain trying to recall the exact date. It was after the bank holiday weekend. Yes, May 19th. She'd come in on the Tuesday, beaming, her hand flashing a newly acquired diamond. Today, according to the kitten in the laptop, was May 17th, a Sunday. If, on Tuesday, Sarah walked in engaged, the next 2 days passed in a surreal, disorienting haze. I went through the motions of a life I'd almost forgotten. I called my mother, her voice younger, less careworn. I wandered through the streets of Earl's Court, the familiar landmarks, the scruffy pub on the corner, the little bakery with the stale scones, the newsagent with the perpetually grumpy owner, all exactly as they had been. I felt like a ghost haunting my own past, an observer in a play where I already knew all the lines, all the tragic turns. On Tuesday morning, my stomach was a knot of agonizing suspense. I dressed in the clothes I'd found, feeling like an imposter in my own skin. The tube journey to the Finch and Sparrow offices in Bloomsbury was a blur. I walked into the familiar open-plan office, the scent of stale coffee and photocopier toner instantly transporting me back. I sat at my old desk, a tiny cubicle crammed between the overflowing slush pile and the perpetually jammed printer, my hands clammy, my breath shallow. I pretended to sort through a manuscript, my eyes flitting constantly towards the entrance. 9 o'clock came and went. 9:15. My hope began to fray. Maybe my memory was wrong. Maybe this whole thing was just a cruel, elaborate trick of a damaged mind. Then, at precisely 9:27, Sarah bustled in, her cheeks flushed, her eyes sparkling with an almost unbearable happiness. She made a beeline for my desk, her left hand held aloft, a delicate diamond winking on her ring finger. "Olivia, you will not believe what happened last night," she trilled, her voice bubbling with excitement. "David asked me. He actually asked me. We're engaged." The office erupted. Squeals of delight, impromptu hugs, demands to see the ring. I just stared at Sarah, at the pure, unadulterated joy radiating from her face, and the last vestiges of my disbelief shattered, crumbling into a million pieces. It was true, all of it. I was back, 5 years back, with a clean slate, a second chance. A dizzying wave of emotion washed over me, relief so profound it was painful. Terror at the sheer cosmic unlikeliness of it all. And then, slowly, powerfully, a burgeoning sense of fierce, unyielding determination. I had been given an impossible gift, a chance to undo the mistakes, to avert the tragedies, to reclaim the life that Marcus Thorne had so systematically tried to extinguish. That evening, back in the quiet solitude of my tiny Earl's courtroom, the kitten on the laptop screen seemed to offer a knowing wink. I opened the document folder, my fingers hovering over the file named The Last Bookstore _draft _May 16. This time, when I opened it, I didn't just see an unfinished story. I saw potential. I saw the flaws, yes, the sentimental passages Marcus had so cruelly derided, the plot holes I hadn't yet plugged. But I also saw the heart of it, the magic that had first sparked the idea. And now, armed with the painful lessons of a future I had already lived, I saw, with blinding clarity, how to make it not just good, but extraordinary. How to make it strong enough to withstand any storm, any critic, any fire. This time, Marcus Thorne would not get his hands on my story. This time, Olivia Holloway was writing her own ending. The knowledge of my impossible second chance was a terrifying, exhilarating tightrope walk. One misstep, one deviation from the narrow path of my new resolve, and I could tumble back into the abyss of Marcus Thorne's making. But with the terror came a clarity I hadn't possessed in years. My tiny Earl's courtroom, once a symbol of my lonely struggle, transformed into a war room, the epicenter of my strategic resurrection. My first priority was deconstructing the myth of Marcus Thorne, not the polished, celebrated director he became, the one whose public persona was so carefully curated, but the Marcus of now, the one who was, in this timeline, still an ambitious, moderately successful filmmaker with a reputation for being intense and driven. I needed to understand the predator before he even scented my presence. My ancient laptop, with its painfully slow dial-up connection, became my window into his past, or rather, my past with him, seen through a new, unclouded lens. Hours were spent scrolling through grainy scans of old film festival programs, archived industry newsletters, and forgotten online forums dedicated to indie cinema. I typed his name, variations of it, names of his early short films into every search engine I could find. The digital breadcrumbs were faint, scattered, but they were there. I found a student film review that praised his ruthless efficiency in storytelling, a phrase that now sent a shiver down my spine. I unearthed an interview on a defunct university radio station's website where he spoke with a chilling detachment about the necessity of artistic control and how collaboration often diluted a singular vision. His singular vision, of course. Then came the more disturbing discoveries, the ones that twisted my stomach into a cold, hard knot. On a message board for aspiring screenwriters dated 6 years prior, a user with a female-sounding pseudonym posted a veiled warning about a charming but manipulative young director who had initially praised her script, offered to help develop it, and then, after months of leading her on, had incorporated several of her key plot points and characters into a project he claimed as solely his own. She didn't name him, but the description of his looks, his mannerisms, the type of film he was making, it was unmistakably Marcus. My blood ran cold. Another one, and another. A comment on an old blog post by a struggling musician, detailing how she'd shared demo tracks with a dynamic filmmaker she'd met at an industry mixer, only to hear her melodies, subtly altered but undeniably hers, woven into the score of his next short film. No credit, no acknowledgement. Just a casual theft, cloaked in the guise of inspiration. The Olivia of the future, the one who had been his wife, his victim, had been too close, too enmeshed in his web of gaslighting and emotional manipulation to see these patterns. I had believed his dismissals of these women, when their stories occasionally surfaced as bitter whispers, as the ramblings of jealous, untalented wannabes. Now, with the clarity of hindsight and the raw wound of my own experiences, I saw the truth. He was a predator who fed on the creativity of others, particularly women he perceived as vulnerable, less established. He'd draw them in with his charisma, his promises of mentorship and collaboration, then systematically absorb their ideas, their energy, their confidence, leaving them hollowed out and doubting their own worth. I wasn't unique. I was just another casualty in his carefully orchestrated campaign of creative vampirism. The anger that rose in me was a clean, cold flame. It didn't consume me with helpless rage, as it had in the past. It forged a core of steel within me. This wasn't just about reclaiming my own story anymore. It was about ensuring he couldn't do this to anyone else, starting with me, in this new, precious timeline. I bought a large, cheap whiteboard from a discount office supply store on Tottenham Court Road and propped it against the peeling wallpaper of my bedroom wall. With a set of brightly colored dry erase markers, I began to map out my 5-year plan. At the top, in bold red letters, I wrote, Project Reclamation. Underneath, columns emerged. Literary milestones, London Book Fair, Year 1, Year 2, Year 3, Established Presence, Network with Agents, International Scouts. Frankfurt Book Fair, Year 3 onwards for translation rights. Key literary agents. I listed them by name, agents known for championing debut novelists with unique voices, agents I knew from my future knowledge would be receptive to a story like The Last Bookstore. Underneath each name, I jotted down notes. Prefers strong female protagonists, looking for magical realism with a contemporary edge, known for securing excellent film options. Another column, film industry inroads. This was trickier. I listed the major film festivals, Sundance, Cannes, TIFF, Berlin, LA. Not to submit my unfinished novel, but to attend, to observe, to learn the landscape from the outside in, before I was ready to step onto the stage. I listed the producers Marcus had eventually targeted. Arthur Jennings, Amelia Hayes. I noted down the release dates of Marcus's upcoming films in this timeline, the festivals they'd screen at, the interviews he'd likely give. I would track his movements, his pronouncements from a safe distance. My writing schedule became sacrosanct. The early mornings before the demands of my editorial assistant job were for The Last Bookstore. The words, once strangled by self-doubt and Marcus's insidious criticisms, now flowed with a newfound freedom. The story deepened. The characters gained complexity. Ilara, my protagonist, was no longer the slightly passive, reactive character she had been in earlier drafts. She became proactive, questioning, fighting for her magical inheritance. The villain, Mr. Pike, who Marcus had dismissed as a caricature of corporate greed, I fleshed out, giving him a tragic backstory, a desperate motivation that made him far more formidable, more human. The magic of the bookstore itself became more nuanced, its rules more intricate, its potential for both good and ill more pronounced. I wasn't just telling a story, I was weaving a tapestry of defiance, each word a stitch in my own emancipation, and I started sending out tentative chapters, not to industry insiders yet, but to people I trusted from my original past, friends I had neglected during my suffocating years with Marcus. Clara, my old university writing partner, who is now, in this timeline, working at a dusty independent bookshop in Hampstead. Her literary judgment as sharp as ever. Ann Thomas, a kind, thoughtful editor from a small poetry press I'd interned for, whose gentle critiques had always been insightful and encouraging. Clara's emails were a lifeline. "Liv, this is magnificent," she wrote after reading the first 50 pages. "Ilara's voice is so compelling, but that scene in chapter 4 where she first discovers the whispering book, could you linger there a little longer? Show us her fear, her awe, really make us feel the uncanniness of it." Thomas, more reserved, focused on the prose. "Some beautiful passages here, Olivia. Watch out for a tendency towards overly elaborate sentence structures in the descriptive sections. Sometimes, simpler is more powerful. Let the magic speak for itself. Their feedback was like cool water on parched earth, constructive, specific, aimed at strengthening my vision, not imposing theirs. It was the antithesis of Marcus's help, which had always been about subtly twisting my ideas to fit his own narrative, to make them more Marcus-like. My confidence, so long battered and bruised, began to mend. I was a writer, a good writer. My story had merit. It deserved to be told, and told on my own terms. The whiteboard filled up. Timelines for finishing the manuscript. Query letter drafts. Lists of independent bookstores to approach for potential readings. A long way off, but it was good to dream. And a new section. Olivia Holloway Strengths. Underneath, I wrote, resilience, unique voice, knowledge of future market, use wisely. Determination. Staring at those words, I felt a flicker of the powerful woman I was becoming, the woman I should have been all along. The final part of my initial strategic plan was to understand the film producers Marcus had so arrogantly claimed as his contacts, Jennings and Hayes, not as names he dropped, but as individuals with specific tastes and track records. I haunted the BFI library, watching their back catalogs, reading old interviews in Sight and Sound and Empire. Jennings, I noted, had a penchant for faithful, slightly reverent adaptations of classic novels. Hayes, on the other hand, seemed drawn to more contemporary, quirky stories, often with a magical realist bent and strong, flawed heroines. Her company, North Star Pictures, had a reputation for taking risks on new talent and for fostering collaborative relationships with authors. A spark of excitement ignited within me. Amelia Hayes. She was the one. If the last bookstore was ever to find a home on screen, North Star felt like the right constellation. The path ahead was daunting, filled with uncertainty. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I wasn't walking it in the suffocating shadow of Marcus Thorne. I was charting my own course, guided by the hard-won wisdom of a future I had survived, and fueled by a burning, unshakable belief in the story I was finally free to write. The email, when it arrived, felt less like an invitation and more like a summons from a past I was determined to rewrite. Forwarded by my well-meaning, and in this timeline, blissfully unaware, Finch and Sparrow colleague Sarah, it announced the Literary Lions Annual Mixer, a confluence of talent and opportunity. My stomach lurched. This was it, the very event, the very gallery space in Mayfair where Olivia Holloway, naive and starstruck, had first encountered the devastatingly charming, insidiously destructive Marcus Thorne. A significant part of me, the part that still flinched from the phantom smell of burning paper, screamed to decline. To feign illness, to run in the opposite direction. Why willingly walk back into the orbit of the man who had systematically tried to dismantle my soul? But the Olivia who now inhabited this younger body, this second chance, was no longer governed by fear alone. She was armed with foreknowledge, fueled by a cold, hard resolve. Avoiding him wasn't the plan. The plan was to meet him, to face him, but this time as an equal, a strategist, not a victim in waiting. This encounter was a crucial reconnaissance mission, a chance to observe the enemy in his natural habitat before he even knew he was on my radar. I agonized over my attire for days. The memory of the drab, ill-fitting floral dress I'd worn the first time, chosen in a flustered attempt to look literary and unthreatening, still made me cringe. This time, there would be no sartorial timidity. I chose a tailored trouser suit in a striking shade of emerald green that I'd found on sale in a boutique on Kings Road, a purchase that felt like an investment in my new persona. It was professional, powerful, yet undeniably feminine. I paired it with sleek, pointed heels that added a couple of inches to my height and a subtle smoky eye makeup that made me feel like I could stare down a dragon. My crimson lipstick, a shade I'd named Retribution Red in my head, was the final touch, a slash of defiance. The gallery was exactly as I remembered, a cavernous white space, already thrumming with the self-important buzz of London's literary set. The air was thick with the scent of expensive wine, canapés, and unchecked ambition. Voices rose and fell in animated discussion. Names were dropped like confetti, and business cards exchanged with the practiced flicks of seasoned players. I took a flute of sparkling water from a passing tray, my hand surprisingly steady, and found a relatively quiet spot near a modern sculpture that looked suspiciously like a pile of discarded plumbing. From there, I could survey the room. It didn't take long to spot him. Marcus was, as always, the center of his own universe, a small constellation of eager listeners orbiting him. He was leaning against a plinth, one hand gesticulating animatedly as he spoke, the other holding a glass of red wine. His dark hair, artfully tousled, caught the gallery lights. He looked every inch the rising star, the charismatic auteur, and utterly, repellently familiar. The confident set of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he delivered a particularly witty line, the almost predatory grace of his movements. I saw it all now, not through the rose-tinted glasses of infatuation, but with the cold, hard clarity of experience. I didn't rush, I let the scene play out, observing his interactions, the way people deferred to him, laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. I needed to reacclimatize myself to his presence, to neutralize the lingering emotional charge his memory still held. When I felt ready, my composure a carefully constructed shield, I began a slow, deliberate circuit of the room, ensuring I would eventually cross his path, but not in a way that seemed too eager, too obvious. He saw me as I passed a huddle of agents discussing a recent seven-figure deal. His gaze, sweeping the room with that proprietary air he had, snagged on me. There was a flicker, not of recognition, of course, but of something else. Appraisal, interest. The look a collector gives a new, intriguing specimen. He murmured a polite excuse to his companions, his eyes never leaving mine, and began to move towards me, a shark scenting blood in the water. Or so he thought. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure," he said, his voice the familiar velvety purr that had once disarmed me so completely. He stopped a respectable yet subtly invasive distance from me. "Marcus Thorne." He extended his hand, his smile a masterpiece of practiced charm. I met his gaze directly, my own expression carefully neutral, perhaps a touch enigmatic. "Olivia Holloway," I replied, my voice calm, my handshake brief and firm, not the lingering, slightly flustered grip I'd offered him in that other life. "Olivia," he repeated, drawing out the syllables as if savoring a rare vintage. His eyes, those intense laser blue pools, did their work, trying to draw me in, to make me feel like the sole focus of his universe. "That's a beautiful name. Are you a writer, Olivia? You have the look of a storyteller." The look of a storyteller. The same line he'd used before. The predictability of it almost made me smile. "I am, as a matter of fact," I said, allowing a hint of polite surprise into my tone. "I'm working on my first novel." "Fascinating." He leaned in a fraction, lowering his voice conspiratorially, creating a bubble of intimacy in the crowded room. "You must tell me about it. I'm always on the lookout for fresh talent, for stories that resonate." "And so," I told him, not with the breathless, nervous enthusiasm of our first encounter, where I'd practically blurted out my entire life story along with the plot of my then manuscript. This time I was measured, concise. I gave him the hook for The Last Bookstore. It's a story about a young woman, Alara, who inherits a very old, very peculiar bookshop in a hidden London alley. She soon discovers that the books within its walls are more than just paper and ink. They're sentient, magical, and have the power to change the lives of those who read them, often in ways they never expected. I watched him closely as I spoke, observing the subtle shifts in his expression. The initial polite attentiveness, the flicker of genuine intrigue when I mentioned the magical element, and then the almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes, the slight purse of his lips, as the mental cogs began to whir. He wasn't just listening, he was assessing, deconstructing, looking for the angle, the flaw, the opportunity for his input. "A magical bookstore," he mused, stroking his chin in a gesture I now recognized as his deep in thought and about to dispense wisdom pose. "Intriguing concept, Olivia. There's a definite appeal there. But the market for pure fantasy, especially from a debut, can be challenging. Have you thought about grounding it more? Perhaps a contemporary thriller element? The protagonist stumbles upon a conspiracy hidden within the books, something that threatens the real world." He paused, his eyes gleaming. "And the magic itself, it needs clear rules, limitations, and consequences. Real, visceral consequences." Audiences need to feel the stakes. Perhaps there's a dark side to the magic, a price to be paid for wielding it. It was almost verbatim the kind of improvements he'd later make to my burned manuscript, the kind that stripped away the heart and soul of my story and replaced it with his own brand of cynical commercialism. He was already, within minutes of meeting me, trying to reshape my narrative, to plant his flag on my creative territory. The old Olivia would have been flattered by his attention, awed by his industry insights, and would have eagerly agreed to his suggestions. The new Olivia smiled faintly. "Those are certainly interesting points to consider, Marcus. Thank you. The story is still in its early stages, so I'm open to exploring different avenues." I kept my tone light, non-committal. I didn't offer to show him any pages. I didn't ask for his card or suggest a follow-up meeting. I then deliberately glanced past him as if spotting someone else in the crowd. "It was a pleasure meeting you," I said, my voice polite but tinged with a hint of dismissal. "But, if you'll excuse me, I really must catch up with a friend." I gave him a brief nod and moved away, leaving him standing there, a faint frown creasing his brow. I could feel his gaze on my back, a mixture of surprise and, I suspected, a new kind of intrigue. He wasn't used to being the one left wanting. He was used to aspiring writers fawning over him, desperate for his approval. My carefully calibrated indifference, my refusal to be easily drawn into his orbit, had clearly piqued his interest far more effectively than any display of eagerness could have. His pursuit, when it came, was indeed more aggressive than in the original timeline. Not desperate, not yet, but certainly more persistent. 2 days later, an email, more effusive than the first one he'd sent me years ago. He'd been utterly captivated by our brief conversation. He had a number of concrete ideas that he was convinced could elevate my project to another level. He suggested lunch, not just coffee. I played a careful game. I agreed to a coffee eventually, after a polite delay, citing a busy schedule. I chose a noisy, impersonal chain cafe near my office, not the quiet, intimate brasserie he suggested. I let him talk, steering the conversation towards his projects, his experiences in the film industry, his much-vaunted connections. He spoke of Arthur Jennings with reverence, of Amelia Hayes with a proprietary air, as if she were already a pawn in his grand career strategy. He dropped names, recounted anecdotes of industry power plays, all designed to impress me, to demonstrate his influence. I listened, absorbing every detail, every nuance, like a spy on a covert mission. He was, unwittingly, providing me with a detailed map of the very landscape I intended to conquer without him. He pressed for details about my novel, for pages he could read. I demurred, citing early drafts, a need for further revision. I kept him at arm's length, feeding him just enough polite interest to keep him engaged, but never enough to give him any real purchase on me or my work. He was fascinated by the challenge, by the novelty of a woman who didn't immediately succumb to his charm offensive. He saw me as a complex puzzle to be solved, a promising talent to be molded. By him, of course. He had no idea that the game we were playing was one I had already lived through, and this time I knew all the rules, all the moves, and precisely how to win. I was gathering intelligence, using his ego, his relentless pursuit as a tool. He thought he was the hunter. He was about to discover he was merely a stepping stone. The following 2 years were a blur of relentless focus, a solitary marathon fueled by lukewarm tea and an unshakable secret knowledge. My little Earl's courtroom, with its perpetually thrumming radiator and view of a grimy brick wall, became my fortress. Inside, I wasn't just rewriting the last bookstore. I was rewriting my destiny, one carefully chosen word at a time. The manuscript grew, not just in length, but in depth and complexity. The lessons from my future life, the sting of Marcus's criticisms, the valid ones, stripped of their cruelty, and the insightful feedback from Clara and Thomas, all coalesced into a story that was far richer, far more resonant than the version he had so contemptuously consigned to the flames. Ilara, my protagonist, was no longer a passive observer of the magic around her. She grappled with its responsibilities, its seductive dangers, its profound moral ambiguities. The enchanted books themselves became characters, their whispered secrets holding both solace and peril. The world of the novel expanded, its mythology deepened. I wrote with a ferocity I hadn't known I possessed, driven by a deadline only I was aware of. The ticking clock of my own past, the imperative to have a finished, polished manuscript ready before the Marcus of this timeline could fully insinuate himself back into my professional or personal life. When I finally typed the words, "the end," a profound, bone-deep exhaustion settled over me, followed by a quiet, trembling sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just a manuscript. It was a declaration of independence, a testament to my survival. It was, unequivocally, mine. Securing a literary agent was the next Everest to climb. I didn't even consider approaching any of the agents Marcus had once casually mentioned he might introduce me to when your work is ready. His endorsement would be the kiss of death, a mark of Cain I was determined to avoid. Instead, I meticulously researched agents who were known for championing unique voices, for discovering debut talent, for not being afraid of stories that blurred genres. My future knowledge provided a few key names, agents who had, in the intervening 5 years of my lost life, risen to prominence. The query letters went out, dozens of them, each one a carefully crafted distillation of my novel's soul, accompanied by the requisite sample chapters. The rejections began to trickle in, then flood. Polite form letter dismissals that stung despite my best efforts to remain detached. Not right for our list at this time. We wish you the best of luck placing your work elsewhere. Each one was a small pinprick to my fragile, newly won confidence. Doubts, those insidious whispers Marcus had so skillfully cultivated, began to creep back in. Maybe he was right. Maybe it is just sentimental fluff. Then, an email with a subject line that made my heart stop. Query, The Last Bookstore, Olivia Holloway, request for full manuscript. It was from Sarah Chen, a young, dynamic agent at a boutique agency, someone who, in my other life, had become a rising star, known for her fierce advocacy for her clients. I'd specifically targeted her, remembering a glowing review from an author she'd plucked from obscurity. I sent the full manuscript with trembling hands, then spent 3 agonizing weeks jumping every time my phone buzzed. Finally, another email from Sarah Chen. Dear Olivia, I started The Last Bookstore on Friday evening and finished it at 3 a.m. on Saturday. I haven't been this excited by a debut novel in years. The world you've built is captivating. Alara is a wonderfully complex heroine, and the magic feels both fresh and timeless. I would be honored to represent you. Can we meet next week? The meeting took place in her small, bright office in Soho, books stacked on every available surface. Sarah Chen was a whirlwind of energy and enthusiasm, her passion for The Last Bookstore radiating from her. She didn't talk about changing its core or making it more commercial in the way Marcus had. She spoke of its strengths, its unique appeal, its potential to find a wide readership. This story has a soul, Olivia, she said, her dark eyes shining. And my job is to make sure the world gets to experience it. We signed the agency agreement right then and there, a celebratory cup of tea sealing the deal. For the first time, I had a true champion, someone who believed in my vision, not someone who wanted to co-opt it. Navigating the submission process with Sarah was an education. My future knowledge gave us a subtle edge. I knew which editors at which publishing houses were actively looking for the kind of magical realism I'd written, which imprints were taking more risks. We compiled a carefully curated submission list, targeting editors who I knew, from my lost future, had a track record of loving and successfully publishing books like mine. Meanwhile, my carefully managed, infrequent interactions with Marcus continued. An occasional brief coffee when he was in town between film projects, a polite exchange at an industry event we both happened to attend. I kept him at a distance, feeding him carefully edited, vague updates about my writing progress, allowing him to believe he was still a peripheral mentor figure. He'd offer unsolicited advice, name-drop producers he was currently schmoozing, blissfully unaware that I was meticulously cross-referencing his pronouncements with my own research, gathering intel. He'd often say things like, "Don't even bother sending your type of whimsical stuff to a place like Kingfisher Press, Olivia. They only want gritty thrillers. You need someone who gets you, like I do." I'd just nod and smile, knowing that Kingfisher Press was, in fact, at the top of Sarah Chen's list for me based on a new, ambitious editor who had recently joined them. The offers for the last bookstore began to arrive, not with a trickle, but with a surprising, exhilarating rush. Sarah Chen's phone seemed to be ringing off the hook. And yes, Kingfisher Press was among the first to express serious interest, along with several other prestigious houses, some of whom Marcus had, in our previous life, confidently asserted were completely out of your league, darling. The manuscript went to a heated, multi-publisher auction. It was a week of dizzying phone calls, escalating bids, and sleepless nights. Sarah was a tigress in negotiations, fighting for the best possible terms, for creative control, for marketing commitments. And then, the final call. "Olivia, are you sitting down?" Sarah's voice was electric. "We have a deal, a 6-figure deal, Olivia, with Crown Helix, one of the biggest, most respected publishers in the UK. They're planning a massive lead title launch." Crown Helix. I could barely breathe. The advance was more money than I'd ever dreamed of earning. But it wasn't just about the money, it was the validation, the belief. News of the book deal spread through the publishing world like wildfire. Marcus inevitably heard about it. His congratulatory phone call was a masterpiece of feigned enthusiasm and subtle possessiveness. "Olivia, darling, stupendous news. I always knew you had it in you. My little protege finally spreads her wings." He laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves. "You must let me take you out to celebrate. We can talk about how my early guidance helped you find your way." "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice coolly polite, a carefully constructed wall against his encroaching ego. "I certainly appreciate the encouragement you offered when I was just starting out." It was a very competitive auction, actually. Crown Helix had a wonderful vision for the book. I subtly but firmly redirected the credit to where it belonged. My agent, the publisher, and, implicitly, myself. His attitude began to shift then. The condescending mentorship act started to fray around the edges, replaced by a more overt, almost desperate need to associate himself with my burgeoning success. He'd mention in interviews when asked about upcoming literary talent, "Oh, Olivia Holloway? Yes, a very promising writer. I've been mentoring her for some time. Delighted to see her finally get her break." If we were at the same industry event, he'd make a point of being photographed near me, his arm casually draped over my shoulder as if we were a creative team. I learned to deftly sidestep these maneuvers, to issue quiet, firm corrections through my publicist to create a polite but unbridgeable distance. And then, as the advance buzz for the last bookstore began to build, even before its publication, something else started to happen. Emails began arriving in Sarah Chen's inbox, not from Marcus or through his channels, but directly to her, from film scouts, from development executives at production companies. They'd heard about the book, about the auction, about the unique story. They wanted to read the manuscript. Among the inquiries were names that made my heart skip a beat. Arthur Jennings Company. And most notably, a senior executive from North Star Pictures, Amelia Hayes's highly respected production house. The very people Marcus had boasted of courting, the ones he'd intended to approach with his bastardized version of my story. Now, they were coming to me, drawn by the legitimate heat and artistic integrity of my own independently achieved success. A slow, triumphant smile spread across my face as Sarah read out their names. Marcus had tried to burn my story to the ground. Instead, phoenix-like, it was rising from the ashes, capturing the attention of the very people he'd sought to impress, and it was doing so entirely on its own terms, under my name, through my efforts. The game was far from over, but this round, unequivocally, was mine. Publication day for the last bookstore dawned crisp and bright, a London autumn morning that felt charged with a nervous, electric energy. Waking in my small Earl's Court flat, a place I still cherished for its role in my rebirth, I felt a tremor of disbelief. This was it. After years of secret toil, of battling demons both internal and external, my story was about to step out into the world, naked and vulnerable, yet also, I hoped, resilient and true. Holding the first finished copy, delivered by a breathless courier from Crown Helix the evening before, had been an almost religious experience. The weight of it in my hands, the smooth, matte finish of the cover art, a subtly magical depiction of Alara standing before the enchanted shop, the crisp smell of new paper and ink, my name, Olivia Holloway, printed in elegant serif beneath the title. Tears had welled, not of sorrow this time, but of a profound, cleansing joy. I had done it. Against all odds, against him, I had done it. The initial reviews started to appear online within days, and they were astonishing. A spellbinding debut, Holloway has crafted a world so immersive, so imbued with a quiet, captivating magic, that readers will yearn to lose themselves within the aisles of the last bookstore, raved The Guardian. More than just a fantasy, this is a novel about the power of stories themselves and the courage it takes to find one's own narrative. Olivia Holloway is a writer to watch, proclaimed a lead review in the Times literary supplement. Words like luminous, enchanting, a modern classic in the making were being used. I read them with a kind of dazed wonder. The ingrained voice of Marcus's criticism, his dismissals of my work as sentimental garbage, finally, blessedly, beginning to recede. The book tour was a whirlwind. Launch parties in London and Manchester, readings in packed independent bookstores from Edinburgh to Brighton, interviews for radio, literary podcasts, even a brief, terrifyingly exciting spot on a morning television book segment. I found myself speaking about Alara and her magical world with a confidence that would have been unthinkable for the Olivia of 5 years prior. The questions about my inspiration, my writing process, the themes of hope and resilience in the novel, I answered them honestly, passionately, drawing from the deep well of experience that had forged both the story and its author. My future knowledge, while not directly applicable to predicting interview questions, gave me a broader understanding of the literary landscape, a sense of perspective that allowed me to engage with critics and readers with a calm, informed grace. Marcus, predictably, attempted to bask in my reflected glory. He appeared uninvited but beaming at my official London launch party, held in the elegant rooms of a Mayfair literary club. He schmoozed with my editor, charmed my agent Sarah Chen, and made a beeline for any journalist or photographer present, positioning himself as my proud mentor. Olivia has been a dear friend and something of a protege for years. I overheard him telling a reporter from a glossy magazine, his arm casually slung around my shoulder as a flashbulb popped. I always knew she had this extraordinary talent, just needed a little guidance to unlock it. I extricated myself from his grasp with a polite smile. Later, when the same reporter asked me about Marcus's influence, I chose my words carefully. Marcus has certainly been a prominent figure in the creative industries for some time, and his early encouragement, like that of many friends and former colleagues, was appreciated as I was finding my way, I said, my tone warm, but unequivocally placing him as one of many, not the singular Svengali he portrayed himself to be. But the last bookstore was a very personal journey, one I largely navigated with the incredible support of my agent and my brilliant editor at Crown Helix. It was a subtle but firm reclaiming of my narrative, a public drawing of boundaries he continually sought to blur. Then the news that made my agent scream with delight down the phone line. The last bookstore hit the Sunday Times bestseller list, number 7 in its first week, then number 4, then, incredibly, number 1. It stayed there for 3 consecutive weeks. The book wasn't just a critical darling, it was a commercial phenomenon. Readers were connecting with Alara's journey, with the magic of the little shop, in a way that surpassed my wildest dream. My little story, the one Marcus had tried to extinguish, was now a beacon. And with that kind of success, the already simmering film interest boiled over. It was no longer just polite inquiries from film scouts. It was serious, concerted pursuit from major production companies, both in the UK and increasingly from Hollywood. My agent's phone was ringing off the hook. The carefully compiled list of producers I'd researched with such diligence in my Earl's Court flat was now a list of people actively seeking meetings with me. Among them, inevitably, were the very names Marcus had once dangled before me like precious, unattainable jewels. Arthur Jennings' company sent a beautifully bound copy of one of his classic adaptations with a handwritten note expressing his profound admiration for my novel. And then, an email from Amelia Hayes herself, the dynamic head of North Star Pictures. Not a tentative feeler from a junior executive, but a direct personal message. She wrote of how The Last Bookstore had captivated her, how she'd read it in a single sitting, how she believed it had the potential to be a truly special, beloved film. She wanted to fly to London to meet me to discuss her vision. A shiver went down my spine as I read her words. This was it. The exact opportunity with the exact producer Marcus had been so desperate to impress with his mangled version of my story. But this time, they weren't interested because of Marcus Thorne's connections or his supposed directorial genius. They were interested because of Olivia Holloway, best-selling author of The Last Bookstore. The path he had tried to steal, the one he had tried to manipulate me onto under his control, was now opening before me, paved by my own success, my own uncompromised vision. I began the process of evaluating the offers with Sarah and a newly hired razor-sharp film agent she recommended. We looked beyond the financial terms, scrutinizing each company's track record with literary adaptations, their relationships with authors, their willingness to grant creative input. I wasn't just selling film rights. I was entrusting my creation to someone else's hands. And I needed to be sure those hands were respectful, capable, and aligned with the spirit of the book. Marcus watched all of this from the sidelines, his frustration growing with every fresh news item about my success, every glowing review, every mention of escalating film interest. His own latest film, a gritty, self-consciously dark thriller, had underperformed at the box office and received lukewarm reviews. The contrast between my soaring trajectory and his stagnating one was not lost on him or on the industry gossips. His attempts to associate himself with my work became more desperate, more blatant. He gave an interview to a film blog where he spoke at length about the years of creative dialogue we'd supposedly shared, hinting that many of the core ideas in The Last Bookstore had emerged from our collaborative brainstorming sessions. My publicist at Crown Helix, a wonderfully shrewd woman named Fiona, drafted a polite but unequivocal statement clarifying that while Mr. Thorne was an acquaintance, the novel was entirely my own creation. We didn't engage in a public spat. That would only give his claims more oxygen. Instead, we focused on celebrating the book's success, on my voice, my story. But Marcus's resentment was a palpable thing, a sour note in the symphony of my triumph. He started making disparaging remarks about my work to mutual acquaintances, comments that inevitably found their way back to me. It's a charming little trifle, of course, but hardly groundbreaking. Or, she's very lucky the market for that sort of sentimental escapism is so strong right now. I learned to let these barbs slide off me. His bitterness was a testament to his own insecurity, his own diminishing power in the narrative of my life. I was Olivia Holloway, the best-selling author. He was rapidly becoming a footnote in my story, a bitter, fading echo of a past I had not just survived, but triumphantly transcended. And the most exciting chapter, the one where Hollywood came calling on my terms, was just beginning. The success of The Last Bookstore transformed from a gentle rolling wave into a full-blown tsunami of industry attention. The phrase bidding war began to be whispered, then spoken outright, in connection with the film rights. My new film agent, a sleek, fast-talking Hollywood veteran named Leo Maxwell, whom Sarah Chen had brought on board, was practically vibrating with excitement. "Kid, we've got a genuine frenzy on our hands," he'd crowed down the phone line from LA, his voice thick with the satisfaction of a shark scenting a particularly juicy deal. Every studio, every major production house, they all want a piece of Alara and her magical shop. We're talking serious players, Olivia, serious money. It was a bewildering, intoxicating time. My days became a blur of conference calls spanning multiple time zones, of reading impassioned pitches from acclaimed directors and producers, each professing their undying love for my novel and their unique vision for its adaptation. I was flown to Los Angeles, a city I'd only ever seen in films, and whisked from one plush studio office to another, from power lunches in sun-drenched Beverly Hills restaurants to discreet meetings in shadowy CAA conference rooms. The sheer scale of it, the money being discussed, the glittering names being attached as potential collaborators, It was a universe away from my tiny Earl's Court flat and the quiet solitude of my writing desk. To navigate this treacherous, high-stakes terrain, Leo had insisted I retain a top-tier entertainment attorney. Eleanor Vance, a formidable woman with a reputation for being both brilliant and terrifyingly thorough, came highly recommended. In our first meeting, her steely gaze had assessed me, not as a wide-eyed debut author, but as a client whose creative and financial interests she was prepared to defend with the ferocity of a mother bear. "These deals, Miss Holloway," she'd stated, her voice crisp and devoid of sentiment, "are designed to benefit the studio. Our job is to ensure they also benefit you. Significantly." I liked her immediately. Marcus, of course, was not content to remain a spectator to this unfolding drama. As the buzz around the film rights reached fever pitch, he launched his own offensive. He called me incessantly, his tone shifting from condescending mentorship to an almost desperate urgency. "Olivia, you must understand," he'd plead, his voice laced with a theatrical earnestness. No one understands your story the way I do. I've lived with it, breathed it, even before you fully realized its potential." The audacity of this claim, given he'd literally tried to burn the original, was breathtaking. I should direct it. It's the only way to protect its integrity, to ensure it isn't Hollywoodized. He then escalated his campaign, trying to leverage his past, albeit now distant, connection to me. He began calling Leo, even attempting to contact Eleanor, arguing his unique synergy with the material. He painted himself as my creative confidant, the one who had nurtured my nascent talent. "I can bring a depth to this, an understanding of Olivia's original vision that no other director could possibly possess," he'd insist, his voice resonating with a passion that might have sounded convincing to anyone who didn't know the truth of our toxic history. I instructed Leo and Eleanor to handle his calls with polite but firm deflection. "We appreciate Mr. Thorne's interest," Eleanor would state coolly, "and Miss Holloway is, of course, considering all creative avenues. We will be in touch if a formal discussion about his potential involvement becomes appropriate." Which, I had privately assured them, it never would. While Marcus was busy trying to insert himself into a role I had no intention of offering him, I was taking my own meetings, quietly, strategically. I met with several highly respected directors whose work I admired, filmmakers known for their visual flair, their sensitivity to character, their respect for source material. I listened to their interpretations of The Last Bookstore, asked pointed questions about their proposed approach, their casting ideas, their willingness to collaborate with an author who intended to be more than just a passive name on a credit roll. This wasn't just about finding a director, it was about finding a creative partner, someone who would honor the soul of my story. And then came the formal offer from North Star Pictures, spearheaded by Amelia Hayes. Her pitch wasn't the flashiest, nor was their initial financial offer the absolute highest, though it was certainly in the top tier. But what set it apart was Amelia herself. She spoke about Alara not as a plot device, but as a young woman she genuinely connected with. She understood the nuances of the magic, the bittersweet undertones of the narrative, the quiet power of the bookstore itself. She didn't talk about changing the ending, or adding a gratuitous love triangle, or making the protagonist male. She spoke of fidelity, of emotional truth, of wanting to create a film that would feel like stepping inside the pages of the book. And crucially, she was not only open to, but enthusiastic about my active involvement. This was where my strategic game with Marcus came into play. In one of our brief, unavoidable phone calls, initiated by him, of course, I let slip with carefully feigned casualness. "North Star Pictures has made a very interesting proposal, Marcus. Amelia Hayes seems to genuinely love the book." His reaction was immediate, a surge of triumphant ego palpable even over the phone. "Amelia, of course. I've known Amelia for years, darling. A brilliant woman. She has excellent taste, naturally." He practically purred. "I'm sure my early conversations with her about the potential of your core concept, even before you'd fully developed it, helped pave the way. I can certainly put in a good word, reinforce her enthusiasm. Let her know I'm available to guide the project. Ensure it stays true to that initial spark we discussed." "That's very thoughtful of you, Marcus," I'd said, my voice a masterpiece of false gratitude. I let him believe he was still a player, that his influence mattered. It kept his ego stroked, his attention slightly misdirected, while Eleanor, Leo, and I engaged in the real, hard-nosed negotiations with North Star. Learning from the bitter lessons of my past, my non-negotiables were clear: an executive producer credit that carried genuine weight, not just a vanity title. Meaningful consultation on the screenplay at every stage, from outline to final polish. Approval over key casting choices, particularly for Alara. And a commitment to preserving the fundamental themes and emotional core of the novel. Eleanor fought for these clauses with the tenacity of a bulldog, her legal arguments precise and unyielding. Leo, meanwhile, ensured the financial package was commensurate with the book's global success and the fierce competition for its rights. There were moments during tense late-night calls with LA when I felt the old Olivia, the one who doubted her worth, begin to surface. Was I asking for too much? Was I being unreasonable? But then I'd remember the acrid smell of burning paper, Marcus's dismissive voice, and the resolve would harden within me. This wasn't just about a film deal. It was about reclaiming my power, my voice, my story. Finally, after weeks of intense back and forth, the deal was struck. North Star Pictures had secured the film rights to The Last Bookstore. The terms were everything I had hoped for and more. I would be an executive producer with meaningful creative input enshrined in the contract. The financial compensation was staggering, and the team at North Star, led by Amelia Hayes, felt like genuine partners, people who respected my work and were committed to bringing it to the screen with integrity. The day I signed the contract in Eleanor Vance's London office, the city's sunlight streaming through the large windows, I felt a profound sense of peace, of a circle finally, satisfyingly closed. I had not just survived, I had triumphed on my own terms. The official announcement was made via a joint press release from Crown Helix and North Star Pictures, trumpeted across all the major industry trades. Best-selling author Olivia Holloway to executive produce film adaptation of her phenomenon, The Last Bookstore with North Star Pictures. My name, my role, front and center. Marcus, I learned later from a rather gleeful Leo, had been completely blindsided. He'd apparently been calling Amelia Hayes, offering his unsolicited guidance, blissfully unaware that the deal was being finalized without his involvement, without his control, without him. When the news broke, his fury was reportedly legendary. He called me, his voice no longer smooth or manipulative, but raw with disbelief and impotent rage. "You signed with North Star without me? After everything I did to connect you with Amelia?" "The deal was concluded this morning, Marcus," I stated, my voice calm, betraying none of the quiet satisfaction that was singing through my veins. Amelia and her team presented the most compelling vision for the film, and their commitment to authorial involvement was unparalleled. It was the best decision for the book. A strangled sound came down the line. "But I was supposed to direct. I was supposed to be the one shaping it. You used me." "I made the best creative and business decision for my work, Marcus," I replied, the words clear, definitive, and entirely my own, as any author would. He hung up, the click of the receiver echoing the final, definitive severing of his parasitic hold on my creative life. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and rendered utterly irrelevant to the future of the story he had once so arrogantly tried to claim. The victory was sweeter than any fiction I could ever write. The party to celebrate the North Star Pictures deal for The Last Bookstore was exactly the kind of glittering, champagne-fueled affair that the Marcus of my previous life would have reveled in, holding court, soaking up the adulation. It was held at a chic rooftop bar in Soho, the kind with panoramic views of the London skyline, fairy lights twinkling like fallen stars, and an endless parade of perfectly crafted canapes. Industry power players mingled with literary lions, agents clinked glasses with producers, and the air buzzed with the intoxicating hum of success. My success. I stood near the edge of the terrace, a flute of sparkling elderflower press in my hand. I needed my wits about me tonight, accepting congratulations. My agent, Sarah Chen, and my film agent, Leo Maxwell, flanking me like a protective honor guard. I felt a strange sense of calm, a detached amusement almost, as I navigated the effusive compliments and shrewdly veiled inquiries. I was no longer the nervous, easily overwhelmed ingenue. I was Olivia Holloway, executive producer, the architect of my own narrative, and I knew, with an unshakable certainty, that Marcus would make an appearance. He wouldn't be able to resist. He arrived late, a calculated entrance designed to draw attention. But the room, once his for the commanding, merely offered a polite ripple of acknowledgement before returning to its myriad conversations. He looked diminished. His usual bespoke suit seemed a little looser, his artfully disheveled hair a touch more genuinely unkempt. There were shadows under his eyes that his practiced charm couldn't quite conceal. He spotted me, his gaze homing in like a heat-seeking missile, and began to weave his way through the throng, his progress less a confident glide and more a determined shoulder barge. "Olivia," he said, his voice tight, devoid of its usual silken persuasion when he finally reached me. Sarah and Leo tensed, but I gave them a subtle, reassuring nod. "We need to talk, privately." I inclined my head. "Of course, Marcus." I led him away from the main throng towards a secluded corner of the terrace, shielded by a large potted olive tree, the distant sounds of the party a muted backdrop to the confrontation I knew was inevitable and for which I was finally, utterly prepared. He rounded on me the moment we were out of earshot, his composure cracking. "You played me, Olivia, right from that night at the Lions Mixer. All that coy innocence, that supposed deference. It was all an act, wasn't it? You used me for my contacts, for my knowledge of the industry." His voice was raw with accusation, with the wounded pride of a master manipulator who has been outmaneuvered at his own game. I met his furious gaze with a calm I didn't have to feign. "Your insights into the industry were illuminating at times, Marcus, I'll grant you that. And some of the names you so generously dropped certainly helped me understand the landscape." I took a deliberate sip of my drink. But let's be very clear, the last bookstore got this deal, this success, because it's a good story, well told. My story, my work. Not because of any doors you imagine you opened for me. He scoffed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Don't insult my intelligence. You always seem to be one step ahead. You knew who to talk to, what they wanted to hear. It was uncanny. As if you'd seen the playbook before the game even started." He stared at me then, a strange, unsettled expression dawning in his eyes, a flicker of something that looked almost like fear. "How, Olivia? How did you know?" This was the moment I could choose to let him believe whatever he wanted or offer him a sliver of the impossible truth, just enough to plant a seed of doubt, of unease, that would perhaps, in some small way, make him question his own infallibility. I smiled, a slow, enigmatic smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Let's just say, Marcus," I said softly, "that in another life, under different stars, I learned a great deal about your tactics, your ambitions, your betrayals. Some lessons once learned are never forgotten, no matter how the timeline shifts." His face paled visibly beneath his carefully maintained tan. He took an involuntary step back. "Another life? What are you talking about? That's insane." But the bluster was gone from his voice. He looked shaken, genuinely unnerved. My quiet confidence, my inexplicable prescience regarding his moves, it clearly resonated with some deep, unacknowledged fear within him that things were not always as they seemed, that he was not always in control. "Perhaps," I conceded, letting the ambiguity hang in the air. "But the point is, Marcus, I saw what you did to my work then. I saw how you tried to twist it, to diminish it, to claim it as your own after deeming it worthless. I wasn't going to let that happen again." He stared at me, speechless for a long moment, the pieces clicking into place in his mind. Not the whole picture, but enough to make him profoundly uncomfortable. He finally seemed to understand that he wasn't dealing with the naive, pliable woman he had once so easily dominated. "So, this is it then," he finally managed, his voice hoarse. "My career, my reputation. You intend to destroy me?" The victim card, so predictable. I almost laughed. "Destroy you, Marcus? Don't be so melodramatic. That was never my intention. My intention was simply to protect my work and claim what is rightfully mine." I paused, then added with a touch of pragmatic coolness. Actually, I've been thinking. Your knowledge of the practicalities of filmmaking, your understanding of on-set protocols, it could still be of some limited use. The studio is looking to hire various consultants. I saw a flicker of hope, of desperate ego in his eyes. I've suggested they might consider you for a very minor, very specific advisory role. A few days on set, perhaps, to consult on some of the more technical period details your early research for your version might have unearthed. The pay wouldn't be much, and there would be no creative input whatsoever. Strictly advisory, take it or leave it. It was a small, almost insulting offer, a carefully calculated move. It would preserve a sliver of his public pride, keep him from becoming an openly hostile saboteur, but it would also place him firmly under my control, a paid subordinate on the project he had once intended to command. He knew it, I knew it. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a weary, grudging acceptance. I'll consider it, he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. Good, I said crisply. My agent's office will be in touch with yours if the studio agrees. I turned to leave him there, a solitary, diminished figure, amidst the glittering celebration of a success he had tried and failed to prevent. As I walked back toward the warmth and laughter of the party, a profound sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't just about the book or the film deal, or even about outmaneuvering Marcus. It was about the journey, about the woman I had become. The foreknowledge had been a gift, a weapon, but it had been my courage, my resilience, my refusal to be broken that had truly turned the tide. The final, most perfect scene of my rebirth didn't take place at a glamorous party or in a lawyer's office, but 6 months later on a sprawling soundstage at Pinewood Studios. The air was alive with the controlled chaos of a major film production, the murmur of voices, the whir of equipment, the scent of sawdust and hot lights. I sat in a comfortable canvas-backed chair, my name clearly stenciled on it, Olivia Holloway, executive producer. In my lap, not a burning manuscript, but a beautifully bound shooting script of The Last Bookstore, filled with my handwritten notes and suggestions, many of which had been incorporated by the talented, respectful screenwriter Amelia Hayes had chosen in close consultation with me. Amelia herself sat beside me, pointing towards the meticulously recreated set of Alara's magical bookshop. "What do you think, Olivia? Did we get the dust right?" she asked, a genuine warmth in her smile. "It's perfect, Amelia," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's exactly as I always imagined it." The assistant director called for quiet. And action. I watched, my heart swelling, as the actress playing Alara, a brilliant newcomer we had discovered after an exhaustive casting process, delivered her first lines. Her voice filled with the wonder and trepidation I had first felt when I'd conceived of this magical world. Her words, my words, echoed through the soundstage, no longer silenced, no longer stolen, but brought to vibrant, luminous life. The contrast with that horrific night by the fireplace, the acrid smell of my burning pages, Marcus's cold, dismissive eyes, could not have been more stark. Then, my story was ash and despair. Now it was light and movement and shared creation, its magic tangible, its future limitless. As the scene concluded and the director yelled, "Cut! Beautiful, everyone!" I leaned back in my chair, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across my face. Later, when the film was released, my name would appear in the credits, twice, based on the novel by Olivia Holloway, and then again, higher up, more prominent. Executive producer, Olivia Holloway. My story, my vision, my victory, illuminated on the silver screen for the entire world to see, and that I knew was the most powerful magic of all.
stinker giveaway is officially live. And maybe we close it at the end of the hype train, which is only 1 minute and 20 seconds. So it's brief. It's brief. It's going to be a brief one. We're out here leaking and gleeking. Just fling. My sister does it on command. Me too. Me too. Me too. My sister's the one who taught me how to do it. I'm going to close this for Dia's benefit. Hi, I do like your channel. Okay. Oh! That went all the way onto my monitor. That went all the way onto my monitor. Did you see it? It's literally that my saliva is on the computer screen. Exclamation mark enter. We have 42 seconds remaining on the hype train, and then I'm going to draw a winner. Put that shit away. Yeah. When you gleek too close to the monitor. Has this ever happened to you? Exclamation mark enter. Gleek is, yeah, where you shoot saliva from under your tongue. Baby Goose peed on me and I had to run back into the living room.